Okay, everybody. Testing out a new setup here in the studio, and thought we would give a little bit of time to do a live stream and talk about some technology questions. If you are watching and you have some questions, feel free. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can drop those in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also drop those in the chat there. Anytime you're dealing with technology, it depends on what kind of technology you're dealing with, obviously. But anytime you're dealing with technology, there are segments of technology that just have problems. They have difficulties, they have struggles. And when you're trying to troubleshoot those, that can be difficult. When you're trying to troubleshoot those for a living, it's a whole nother difficulty level. So, what we're going to talk about this evening as we're going through this live stream is some areas of technology. We'll pick out a few. And how do you overcome the problems that keep you up at night? How do you get past the difficult situations? Because the reality is, a lot of times the solutions share aspects across different types of technology. The decisions that you make in running your business or in working with an organization or in working in technology on a daily basis, it doesn't matter what kind of technology you're dealing with. A lot of the problems are shared problems across all of those spaces. So we'll try to deal with this in a high level. At the same time, we will hopefully be able to add something that will help you on an individual level. As you're considering technology, one of the biggest things that you will find to be the type of problem that keeps you up at night, in my experience, is the disaster you've given no time in preparation for. As you look at technology, as you look at the struggles, the difficulties, and the things that you have to deal with in technology, there are a lot of use cases that are just hard to deal with. There are a lot of use cases that have a great deal of potential downside. But the biggest downside is never actually stopping to consider what if. You can what if yourself to death, and that's not good. You're not going to benefit yourself by doing that. But if you never do the what if, then you never plan for failures. And here's one thing that we all realize to be true about life. There will be failures. Technology spaces, technology companies, they love this concept of fail fast and improve. And that works great until the failure's catastrophic and could have been avoided if someone had thought through the what ifs. So let's talk about this kind of on a realistic level. Let's say you manage websites and you get started, you're building websites for people, you're building websites for businesses, you're building websites that affect people's income and operations. Maybe it's not your business that you're building a website for, maybe it's other people's businesses, but it's your reputation on the line. If you don't plan for servers to fail, you will end up in a situation like I ended up in. Back when I first started building websites for people, years and years and years ago, well over a decade ago now, we got a we got a hosting plan that involved a virtual server, and it was a good price. We thought it was a great situation, and it was. You know, we were back in that day, we were running Windows Server, probably 2003, maybe 2008, but if so, it was an early version of 2008. It was just something to get up off the ground. We figured out how to run WordPress on Windows Server back when no one ran WordPress on Windows Server, and certainly long before you could just spin up a WordPress site very quickly and easily through some automated scripts. And it was going fine until about a year or two later. Went to check the websites one day, and of course, as it always will be, the disaster doesn't come when it's convenient. The disaster that keeps you up at night doesn't come when you're ready for it and when your schedule's cleared. It comes while you are on vacation. Just ask anybody. The disasters don't come when you want them to. They come at the least opportune time. So, here I am. I'm on vacation. And I'm supposed to be spending time with family when I get an email. Is our server down? Question mark. Let me go check. Now, I was young. I was inexperienced. I obviously didn't have anything monitoring the uptime of my websites and notifying me proactively when a site was down. All of these things are things that could have been done better. But set those aside. Those are the little things. The big thing was the server was down. And whenever you have a server that people are relying upon go down, the first thing you think is, oh no, what did I do wrong? Oh no, what did I install that crashed the server? Because servers are just computers. They're just computers. You put the wrong piece of software on there and it slows it down to nothing, and then it just crashes, locks up. Well, when you're dealing with a virtual server is a non-real computer. It's a virtual computer running inside of a bunch of real hardware, but that real hardware hosts lots of different servers, all of them virtual servers inside the real hardware. So the nice piece about a virtual server is if you need to reboot it, unlike most machines that people use at home, you can send that reboot command and it happens almost instantaneously because there's no actual hardware rebooting. When you reboot a virtual server, it's all in the software. It shuts down, it restarts, and as fast as the CPU can restart it, when the CPU's never stopped working, it's never actually shut down, it boots back up. There you go. So I log on and go to the web dashboard of my host, and I attempt to send it a command to reboot. And it doesn't respond. A reboot command where the reboot doesn't respond. So, reboot doesn't respond. The server's still down. The websites are still down. So I start checking other people's sites. all on the same server, of course, because I was young, inexperienced, and broke. So I start checking sites. That one's down. That one's down. That one's down. That one's down. So if it were just a piece of code that had locked up the server, there's the chance that all of the sites might not respond. That's why I had kind of defaulted to reboot the VPS, the virtual machine. So it wouldn't reboot. It wouldn't respond. I reach out to the hosting company. I'm having a problem with my server. Can y'all take a look at it? Now, I had worked with the hosting company before, had times where they had to go reset a server. No big deal. Usually they were fast, competent, quick to get on the ball and actually get the server back up. We're going to go check on it, blah, 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 blah. We'll let you know. So I shoot off a message to the client, working on it, blah, 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 blah. We'll let you know. 2 hours goes by. Haven't heard anything. 6 hours goes by. Haven't heard anything. Wake up the next morning. Haven't heard anything. Shoot off a message to support. So guys, server back up yet? Not yet, working on it. 2 days goes by. Still nothing. 3 days goes by. Still nothing. Finally, I go, what in the world is going on? Why is the server not back up yet? To which the support technician responds, the storage array that your virtual machine was running on had a catastrophic error, and we are trying to recover the data. As I mentioned, when you run a virtual machine, the virtual machine is just one virtual computer inside of a real computer, or in this case, a real series of servers all using a series of storage devices attached through the network or some other way back in that day. And those are serving this content out. And in this case, that storage array had crashed. And my websites were all down for the foreseeable future. Now, the technology problem that keeps you up all night. If that system that I've put in place, and that I never thought to keep a redundant and multiple location backup of, goes down, what happens? And how much does that cost me? In time and effort to make good on delivering a service that I never planned to go down. I am incredibly grateful that for the most part, the sites that I had built, I had not only, prior to that point, started taking database backups of those sites, but also semi-regularly downloading a copy of all of the files. So with WordPress, here's an interesting tidbit. If you build a WordPress site, the two things you have to make a WordPress site operate properly are a MySQL database, which is where all the information, the text, the pages, the references, the IDs, categories, etc., all of those things that make up a WordPress website are stored in a database, together with a reference to a folder or series of folders on a hard drive or a storage location, and the database references the storage location. The storage location is where all the files are. If you have the files and not the database, you are in for a world of hurt, because you will get to rebuild every single one of those websites. If you have the database and not the files, you are in an even worse world of hurt, because while you may have all of the written content, you have nothing by way of the rest of the content. Now, if you don't have the database or the files, give up and go home, because you have no website when it comes to WordPress if you don't have the database and you don't have the files. Now imagine you had spent 40 or 50 hours or 20 or 30 days, take your pick, building a website for an organization, only to have a storage array that you don't own, you don't control, it's up in the cloud somewhere, crash, and by the way, never to be revived ever again. What if you hadn't made a backup? You see, if you had made a backup like 2 weeks before, you'd have some work to go back and do. If you made a backup 2 months before, you'd have more work to go back and do, but you'd have some place to start. If you don't make a backup, if you run websites on hosting like Bluehost or SiteGround, or pick one, doesn't matter which one, and you don't have a backup of your website, trust me, if their storage for the area of your of their service where your website is hosted goes down, they're not reimbursing you your cost to get your data back or your site back. They will say, we're very sorry, you pay us $6 a month or less. We've done all we can do. Tough luck, have fun, sayonara. Now, if your business is reliant upon a $6 a month website to stay up and have guaranteed storage, and you don't have a backup of it, you shouldn't sleep at night until you fix it. If you have hired someone else to build a website for your business, and they built it, and they built it on a platform out there in the internet, and you don't know if they have a backup of it, you shouldn't sleep at night. If you don't have a backup of it, it's all well and good if your consultant or your web developer has a backup of it, but if they don't supply that to you, then how do you know they have it? So let's step back. If the service that they're using that they told you to contract with or they contracted with goes down and all the files and the database are gone. And they don't have a backup. And the provider doesn't have a backup. Now, what do you do? Well, the short version is you probably have to start over. And you probably need to start over with a different web developer. So then, how do you solve a problem that keeps you up at night, or should? First, in this situation, I highly recommend that you run a program in your website that creates a backup every single day, together with a separate piece of programming on the server that creates a backup of the server at minimum once a week. So here's what that does. If you have a backup of the site, that's good and an easy way to recover from a small disaster. Let's say your a plugin or something, some line of code or whatever, have a problem, or let's say that somebody's login gets compromised. You can easily restore a previous version. But what happens if your site gets hacked? If your site gets hacked and your developer who you hired didn't plan for that, and they don't have a backup, how long will it take you to go clean all of this junk off of your site? Because here's what happens when a site gets hacked. Everything gets affected. Usually it's hacked by some sort of bot, some sort of automation. And that automation system, as soon as it gets in, as soon as it gets a login, it starts putting code everywhere. Here's the short answer. You'll never get it back. You'll never be able to trust that what you're running at that moment in time for the future is clean code. So someone visits your business's website and they get a virus or a piece of malware downloaded to their computer. And then another person comes to your website and they get a piece of malware, and another person. And slowly over time, what happens is, as a result of all this happening, your Google search rankings and your Google SEO starts dropping, and you now become a site that Google flags as malware infected. Now what do? Now Google's not sending you customers anymore. Now Google's got a warning up that says this site may contain malware. If you just have a copy of the files and a copy of the database, you can fix that problem, so long as you have a copy prior to the event. Because you can go back in stages to a point where you know nothing has been, none of that code exists here. And you can restore it, or what you should do, cancel that current server account, launch a new server, put the site back on it from the backup, and then go plug all the security holes that you obviously didn't have plugged, maybe because you weren't running updates. So you say, oh, all right, Aaron, you've been talking for 20 minutes about a crash or a hack and being backed up. What do you use? How do you back up websites? So there's two ways that I recommend. Number one, let's see if I can put this up on screen here. Okay, here we go. So this tool, see if I can make it a little bigger here. This tool is available inside the WordPress plugins area. Now, obviously, this particular idea is exclusive to WordPress. But you can run this plugin on any site, on any WordPress host, except WordPress.com, any full-fledged WordPress host. You can run this plugin, and you can create a download and export of your entire site, all your pictures, all your database, all your files, all of it packaged up as one single file that you download. The only thing is, it is limited in the file size that the entire website can be for the free version. For the free version, if your website is less than 500 megabytes, you can use this tool for free. Considering a brand new WordPress website is like 40 megabytes, you could have a site that ran for quite a while before you needed to worry about that. That's one option. You say, well, but my website's bigger than that. My website has lots of pictures on it, and it's never going to be anywhere close to that size. Well, if you go to that site's developer, ServeMask, you can find that they have not only a bunch of different ways you can back up your site, but they also have an unlimited extension. $69, pay for that. Doesn't matter how big your website is. I have backed up websites that were 24 gigs or more into a single file and restored them on a new server using this tool. There are some caveats to that, and that is the most unreliable thing when dealing with a very large website and its backup is your personal internet connection and the speed of your personal internet connection. The server online has the capacity to use more speed than you can generate off of your personal internet connection unless you have a fiber connection. So if your internet connection drops out while you're trying to upload a 24 gig file, you might fail to restore the server. It's a big hassle. It takes a long time. Maybe something to consider. This removes the storage size limitation. But what if you wanted to back up not to your computer, but to another cloud location? That's where something like their tool like this for Dropbox comes in. If you buy this tool and you buy the Dropbox extension, you automatically get the unlimited capacity, so you can back up an unlimited size by way of the server size. But you also have the ability to go to a service where you can back up to Dropbox, but then if you want to, you can restore a server from Dropbox. So that would be an option. Say, well, I only have 2 gigabytes of Dropbox space, so I'm not sure that helps me. Well, maybe you have Google Drive. With Google Drive, if you have a business account and you have more than 5 users, you have the capability, at least, of having technically unlimited storage, or at least a terabyte of storage per user. So as long as your website's less than a terabyte and you've got plenty of space on your Google Drive, you can have it back up your website every single day to Google Drive. If something happens to your site, and by the way, you can tell it, okay, I want to keep this many copies of the backups. In other words, it doesn't delete yesterday's backup when it puts today's backup there. It puts a new backup there for a certain number of days or till it runs out of space. If you tell it never delete any backups, you'll have every backup going once a day, going back to the time you started or until you run out of Google Drive space. If instead you say, you know what, I don't need to go back 2 years. If I had to go back 2 years, I'd just go build a new site. I'm never going back that far. Too much has happened since then. Too much has changed since then. I'm going to go back a month and a half. A month and a half of backups where you have a backup every single day for a month and a half, that gives you some assurance that you can restore your site and have a working site. That's about what I average doing. Month and a half every day. And after it reaches that month and a half point, the plugin will automatically start deleting the ones that are the oldest and keeping the most current month and a half. If you are an Amazon S3 user, as opposed to paying for Google Drive or Dropbox, if you just want to pay for the storage you actually use, which will be cheaper for a long time than the other options, which will eventually be cheaper than S3 if you store enough stuff. You can go through that process. It's got more steps involved in it, but you can go through that process, set up your S3 account, set up your S3 bucket, set up your credentials, and store your files in S3. You can also restore a website from S3. That is the single most reliable method I have found with this tool. Someone's going to ask if they know much about WordPress. Well, Aaron, I've got like 70 sites built inside WordPress multi-site. First of all, that's a terrible idea. Second of all, they're going to ask, can I use this tool to back up my 70 sites at one time? Yes, you can. But you will need the multi-site extension. It as well comes with the unlimited size, so you don't have to get any of the others. You can use this and just download it to your computer. But this one also has a great advantage. You can take a single site that's a part of your multi-site, export it out as a standalone site, and then launch a server with just that site on it. So when you realize that running 70 sites in a multi-site is a terrible idea, and you decide to run them as individual WordPress installs, you can migrate all of them out and have working sites, each one individually set up, running in its own hosting, doing what you should have done to begin with, and you won't have to rebuild 70 websites in order to do that. You can also take an individual site and import it into a multi-site if you ever needed to do that. So, this is a great ongoing solution for backing up WordPress. So what do you do if the situation happens at a deeper level than WordPress? Or you have a situation where you do have a server that gets compromised or a WordPress install that gets compromised, and you want to make sure that there is no chance that that hacker or that code is still on your server. So maybe you assume that you fixed the WordPress install, but how do you know it's not somewhere else on the server? How do you know that that code, that file didn't execute something where some other part of the server besides your little WordPress folder and your little WordPress database didn't get affected? That's where and why I use hosting from DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean has a great solution for this. And it's a very industry standard concept. But what DigitalOcean allows you to do is take snapshots of your server. A snapshot is where DigitalOcean as a service takes a momentary, as it were, image or picture of your server in its exact state and stores a copy of that as a file, and they do that for one time per week, going back a certain number of weeks. I think it's 6. I cannot express to you how useful that is, that you can take a server all the way from bare bones file level, image level state and go restore it to a previous time with about 5 minutes of downtime. So if there's evidence that your server was compromised or a WordPress site was compromised a week ago or a day ago or 3 or 4 days ago, you go log into DigitalOcean and you take that snapshot and you restore that snapshot from a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And you restore and you completely overwrite. The current server that got hacked is gone. Wiped out, deleted, completely gone. The previous version that has a vulnerability in it, maybe, has been restored. And you go update plugins, fix things, secure the vulnerability, and you have your life back. Problems that keep you up at night. Technology questions that keep you up at night. Number 1, what do I do if something happens to my website? And the answer is, you think of that before it happens. And you spend a little bit of money on tools and systems that will protect you and give you a platform to restore your data when, not if, when something happens, because it will. Something will happen. And you will have your site go down. Or you will have your site compromised. And if you plan in advance, if you use tools like WP All-in-One Migration, and there's other tools out there, that's just the one I use, and you have a secondary system, because you should never trust one backup system. You should never trust one backup method. You should never trust one backup location. In the IT world, we have a philosophy: if it's stored in only 2 locations, it's not backed up. If it's stored on only one kind of data format, it's not backed up. It needs to be in 2 different kinds of formats, and it needs to be in a minimum of 3 locations. So if you have a copy on your computer in one format and Dropbox or Google Drive or S3 has a copy in those files, in one format, and you have a snapshot of your server in DigitalOcean in another format, completely different thing, now you have a backup solution for a site. Now, let me ask you this. If you get your website hosting from a place like Bluehost, tell me they have a backup solution like that. They don't. And if your site goes down, or if the storage system that's hosting your site goes down, and they send you that email, we're very sorry. What you're not going to read at the end of that email is, but we planned ahead and everything will be fine in about an hour. That's not going to happen. You have to pay a whole lot more for that. There are site hosts and systems out there that do that. And the good ones even allow you to download a copy. So they have a copy, you have a copy, and regular backups are happening. And you can do these other things or similar things. So it exists, but you're not going to get it for $5 a month. If your business or even your hobby that you have dedicated hundreds and thousands of hours to is reliant upon a hosting system for a website that costs you $5 a month, you will be sorry about that at some point. So learn to think ahead. Plan ahead. Use some wisdom, because failures will happen. Not a question of if, only a question of when. That's going to be our time for tonight. What questions keep you up at night? If you get a chance, drop a few in the comments. We'll deal with them in one of these coming live streams. Have a great night.